Hi, everybody. Just another or a continuation of our quick overview of Chapter 1. And I'm going to warn you that this is a quick overview. Again, I'm not trying to summarize content for you. I'm offering my additions to the content that you've read in your text. So you must read the textbook. You will not be able to get through the work without reading the textbook. It might not hurt to work through the exercises that have been assigned in Chapter 1 already before you view the rest of this presentation. What we're looking at here is a strategy for conducting an inquiry-based writing project. This slide can contrast the sort of writing that you may have done in the past, informative reports, with the inquiry-based writing we're going to be focusing on in this course. And so you see report writing, you tend to focus on just the facts, on developing arguments and proof. The discovery-based writing, the inquiry-based writing, begins with questions, is sustained by an openness to the answers you come across, and a willingness to be surprised by those answers. You cannot ask a question with the answer already in mind. So if you were to write an essay on stem cell research, for example, I will discourage you from writing those sorts of essays. Actually, you won't have opportunity to in this class at any rate. But if you were to go into your research with a conclusion drawn already and not allow the research you find to change your mind if you've discovered your original view is wrong, then you're not doing inquiry-based writing. But what I want to emphasize is strong informative writing will also include an inquiry process. In other words, if you're writing an informative essay on stem cell research, you sure as heck better be responsive to answers coming your way that you might not have anticipated, because otherwise your informative document isn't going to do the work it's supposed to do. It's not going to provide sound information for your readers. These are the key habits of mind the course is trying to encourage in you. You begin with questions. You suspend your judgment. In other words, you don't have a conclusion in mind as you read. You don't start with your thesis, in other words. You generate questions and then you try to find the answers. Early on, you have to be willing to write badly. The early drafts, the purpose of anything you're writing early on is just to get ideas together. A lot of this stuff you'll do here in your journal, and I don't want you worrying about proofreading and spelling in your journal. The revision process will allow you to smooth things out before they get to your audience. And finally, a search for surprise, a willingness to have and an eagerness to have the answers you get to the questions you've generated not be what you thought they would be. I'm going to only touch on this really briefly, this in the next slide. This is basically identifying the kinds of questions you might ask to tackle a question or an issue, okay? So question of fact, interpretation, hypothesis, policy, relationship, question of value. These are all described very carefully in your text. The key point I want to take away from that is the types of questions that you ask will help you determine the genre of the writing that you're doing, or if you've been assigned a specific genre, that's going to affect the kind of questions you want to ask. And if you see the genres, for example, that are listed on the right, you have an idea of what we're talking about. Inquiry essays, argumentative essays, research papers, proposals, literary essays. We're going to do actually one of these, an ethnographic essay. These are different kinds of writing. And I would say the same would be the case when you look outside of 111 to different kinds of writing you'll do in the workplace, for example. A resume is a genre of writing, right? A letter is a genre of writing. Okay, finally, we're going to contrast the two ways of thinking that feed into that idea of all at onceness we talked about in the very first presentation. What you want to do is practice a style of writing, a process of thinking, that is going to help you generate ideas, and you're going to see what you're balancing all the time is your critical mind, which you'll be using to evaluate the ideas that you've gotten, to trim them down, pick the ones that are best, and the creative mind, which allows you to explore and generate material. You absolutely need both of these. You're just generating stuff, but you don't have the wherewithal to take out the stuff that's not good, right? To apply critical thinking, use your critical mind, you're going to produce awful essays. And that's one of the reasons you have to be willing to write badly, but also know that you will have to maybe lose a lot of the stuff you write early on because it's just not where you need it to be. This is a breakdown of dialectical thinking, which is thinking that's kind of divided in two opposing, contrasting modes. And you can look through this here in SlideShare in the text. I wanted to pause briefly here, though. This is a visual representation of those two kinds of reading, which is really at the heart of what this course is going to be about, and that's those two ways of thinking. The mountain is here to represent critical thinking, the sea, creative thinking. So what are you doing as you're writing an essay? You're moving back and forth between them. You're going to the sea, you're dipping in, you're pulling out water, catching fish, whatever. Right? Then you go back up to the mountain to look at what you found and decide what is good and what is bad. And then you go back to the sea and see what else you can get. And sometimes as you sort through the things you found, you will have questions that will generate completely new things that you go back and dip into that sea to find. So this is a very powerful image. The key really is you moving back and forth between these throughout the writing process. Last piece of this chapter gets into writing situations and rhetorical choices. Again, rhetorical choices are the choices you make about your writing based on your writing situation, who you are, the context in which you're writing, who your audience is. Okay? And here you get a visual that really nicely represents that. Right in the middle is this concept of thinking rhetorically. And again, what does that word mean? Well, it doesn't hurt to look it up, actually. But what does it mean? It means being conscious of your audience and the situation when you analyze when you're preparing a message. It could be a presentation, a speech, or a document. So here we've got purpose, the subject that you're writing about, your audience, and then the genre and the medium. Genre being the type of writing, medium being how you're delivering it. Is it a printed essay? Is it going to be a web page? Is it going to be a multimodal essay? These are tips to analyzing the rhetorical situation. And again, these are in your text, or you can dwell on them a little bit more in the SlideShare version. But basically, these are questions you should ask. And I will have you work through this process as you start writing about your purpose for writing, the subject that you're writing about, the audience for whom you're writing, and I'll oftentimes ask you to make that very specific, and the form, the style, the genre of what you're writing. And that, my friends, is it.